Hello everybody, welcome to a creepypasta reading. Death here, and I hope that you're all having a wonderful and safe Halloween so far. I will be reading two creepypastas this evening. The first one, this one, is called Red Moon. The second one is called Fear Always Finds You. Please note that if you wish to read these stories either in a different tab, or perhaps send these stories to somebody that you know, there will be links in the description to both these stories, as well as the creepy, scary, suspenseful horror music that you see to your right. Again, links to all these are in the description below, and let us begin with the story of Red Moon. On July 18th, 2020, NASA launched a new vessel. 6 astronauts boarded Goliath 1 and set off to prepare the first human colony on the moon. The preparations were expected to take a year, but the vessel carried 6 months of additional food, past the expectation in case of emergency. Radio communication was possible only on the side of the moon facing the Earth. The astronauts were told to stay in this area to maintain radio contact. The astronauts had landed on the eastern border of the Serenities. This lunar mare was largely covered in basalt and held few craters, making it perfect for colonization. The goal of the astronauts was simple: map the area for colonization and blueprint the discretion of buildings. The only real danger on the moon was meteors striking it, as the moon was devoid of any atmosphere. An electronic journal of the day's events was to be sent back to NASA, along with any interesting photos or videos. Although, it was to be seen if anything exciting could happen. It was the moon after all. The first few months of the journals were fairly normal. The astronauts were right on schedule with predicted progress. They wasted no time to blueprint the area. Everything in a normal town was to be in the future town. A grocery store, a school, a hospital, among other things. Of course, these supplies would need to be sent by other vessels. It wasn't their mission to build anything. Then, on the 17th of September that year, the daily report had not come. It was speculated that it was forgotten, but didn't come the next day either. Radio communication was not successful with the astronauts, and was only met with static. The radio tower was seen as working perfectly. It seemed the astronauts were simply not within range of it. Several missing videos were later recovered from the site. The following is a description of each video. The astronauts were told to label their videos by date, using numbers following the date if more than one video was recorded that day. The first video was labeled appropriately as September 16, 2020. It was around 10 minutes long and is mostly spent examining small craters near the border of the mare. Near the end of the video, the astronaut talks about hearing scratching noises from the crater, but this wasn't audible. The journal sent to NASA for the 16th of December did not mention this noise. The second video is labeled appropriately as September 17th, 2020. This video was also focused around craters, especially the nearby Bessel crater. This is an exceptionally large crater, over 9 miles across and a mile deep. The plan was to eventually build a bridge across the crater. This video is roughly the same length of the previous video. The astronauts begin to make notes of the crater when the scratching sound is heard again. This time, however, it is quite audible and appears to be coming from the basin of the crater. The sound becomes so loud it is beginning to irritate the astronauts. One of the men looks down over the edge to find the source of the sound. A force, unseen by the camera, suddenly pulls the astronaut into the crater. His screams are heard briefly before the camera is cut short. The third and final video is labeled Code 7700 Please Help. The date, unknown, but it can be assumed that it is probably the next day. It begins with an astronaut in an oxygen tent, talking to the camera. He explains in a calm voice that he has been unable to contact the radio. He also explains about how 2 of the astronauts have been horribly slaughtered. At this point, tears start to roll down his face, but he continues a calm tone. The scratching noise from the previous videos is heard suddenly and sharply. The camera is knocked to an adjacent wall of the tent as we listen to the astronaut pleading, followed by a heavy thump. The man continues to plead and cry for help, stating that he can't breathe. The camera is completely turned away from the man, so it is not seeing what is attacking him. We see blood begin to splatter the adjacent wall. The man continues to scream for help and is now completely bawling. Blood spatters against the wall for a second time, against the wall alongside the sound of bones snapping and flesh being torn from them. His pleas for help suddenly stop and is just reduced to inane screaming and crying. As blood spatters against the wall again, a bit of brown liquid now mixes in with the bright red liquid. The tearing sound has since been replaced with that of squishing and sloshing. The only sound the man makes now is a quiet death rattle. Suddenly, the man goes silent and several of his organs are tossed in the direction of the wall. Coincidentally, the night of September 18 was a red moon. None of the bodies of the astronauts from Goliath 1 were ever fully recovered. Colonization of the moon has been postponed until further notice. The team sent out to investigate the radio communication problems the astronauts were having refused to talk to the public. Of the 4-man repair team, 2 have committed suicide since returning to Earth. While the 3 videos were recovered, a photograph was also recovered. It is still unknown as to what that photograph is. Fear always finds you. Never go into the forest, child, my mother used to say to me when I was little. Horrible things lie within those forests. Horrible, horrible things. What kinds of horrible things, Mother? I'd ask in return. In the forest lie fear incarnate. For anything that you fear, that any of us fear, you may find it embodied in the forest. Has anyone ever been into the forest? Yes, child. Many have tried to brave the forest, hoping to find something on the other side. Has anyone ever made it through? I don't know. Has anyone ever returned? At this question, my mother would sit pensively for a moment, her expression becoming darker, more fearful and depressive. A few folks, yes. What did they say? What had they seen? I would ask excitedly. Rarely did they see anything, Mother would say as she looked away from me down at her lap. They were changed men. Not all lasted long back into the town. Did their fears find them, Mother? Fear always finds you, she'd say as she stood up. The conversation always ended here. Mother and I had this conversation many times over the course of our years together. It always went the same way, always ending with that final phrase, fear always finds you. Those words haunted me as a child. In a way, it also inspired me. I lived in a small village. Very small. The way of no other village to compare it to. It was surrounded by thick forest, massive silvery trees fencing us in. From one side of the village, you could see the trees growing next to the other side as clearly as if they were the trees next to you. Around the perimeter of our land, we kept our crops, and our houses were condensed to the center. The number of villagers never went higher than 75. Births were usually followed closely by deaths. Children went to school during the day and stayed inside for most of the rest of their time while their parents worked the farms. This modest life was never quite enough for me. I felt as though I were in a box with nothing to do and nowhere to go. The town was my prison, the forest, the bars. I was never satisfied with what I was told in school. My curiosity could not be contained. It was always, how could we know anything about anything if all we ever had known was this small patch of land? What had come before then? What was in the forest that kept us from expanding, from leading better lives? Alas, my teachers never knew. My mother was the only one who would give me anything regarding the forest, and even she gave me so little. I knew not what she meant by horrible things or fear incarnate. I had to be satisfied with what I was given. Going into the forest was taboo, everyone knew that, and yet I still wanted to see for myself. When I reached the age of 17, I could no longer wait. It had been another night of quizzing my mother about the forest, again ending with fear always finds you. Exasperated, I ran into my room and started to plot my escape. It was a simple plan, run away. That was really all I could do. No one here had sympathized with my curiosity. The only way to accomplish anything was to go into the forest for myself. Maybe there was something on the other side of the forest. Maybe even people! This was such an exciting prospect to me, especially seeing as how I had grown and was so wary of these people there long ago. If this didn't pan out, I could always just return back to the village. Mother said people before had made it back, I told myself, and as I seem to be a bit more contempt than any other people here, I'm sure I'll be fine. I grabbed a sack of some vegetables, and in the middle of the night, while Mother was asleep, I snuck out. The village typically goes to sleep at sundown. Nevertheless, I made my way towards the forest with extreme caution. Reaching the edge of the crop area, I turned my complete attention to the woods. The seemingly impenetrable mass of trees was striking, almost freezing me in place. I realized with a jolt that I was scared. Scared of the darkness before me, scared of the unknown, scared of the trees themselves and all that they symbolized. I thought back to my mother's words. For anything that you fear, that any of us fear, you may find it embodied in the forest. My fear was only reasonable, I thought. This is unknown territory. If I fear the forest itself, what else could find me within it? Fear always finds you, I muttered to myself. Ugh. With that, I marched into the forest. It was a bizarre feeling at first, being entirely surrounded by trees. Only ever had I seen them from one side, enclosing my village. I trekked onwards through them, trying to keep myself going in one direction, only able to see by the light of the moon. Even that light was largely hidden by the thick canopy above me that seemed to stretch on to touch the sky itself. The only sounds I heard were that of my breath and my footsteps. After what I took to be an hour of walking, I decided to stop and sit by a tree. I realized that in my anger earlier that night, I had forgotten to eat supper. I pulled out some food and stared into the darkness around me. There was no movement, no more sound at all. It was surreal, serene, but ominous. Fear always finds you, I whispered to myself again. I'm doing fine so far, thank you very much, Mother. My fear of the forest had abated over the course of my walk. It's just a bunch of trees, I said, fixing my gaze on a tree about 10 feet in front of me, where a beam of moonlight was falling through the dark. Suddenly, something caught my eye directly to the left of that tree. I could hardly make it out as it was still dark, but something in the darkness had moved. I jumped up to my feet, brandishing my meal like a weapon pointed at the dark spot. Hello? I called out. Is someone there? Have you come looking for me? There was no more movement. I stood there for a few minutes, completely frozen, waiting for a response. I eventually resolved that it had been nothing. Perhaps wind hitting a lower tree branch. And so I moved to sit back down. As I was turning back around, there was another movement, larger this time. I whipped back around to glimpse it. Something there had moved closer, to be standing at the tree in front of me. I still could not see it. I flattened myself against the tree I was on, breathing heavily now. Timidly, after a moment I spoke. Who or what is there? The shape moved closer to me, stopping just before being past the tree. It shifted itself so that, slowly, it emerged into the moonlight. I could only see its face, if it could be so called. What I had thought was darkness concealing was actually just the thing's flesh, dark as the night itself. If not darker, pulled tightly around a slender rectangular skull. It bore 3 glazing pearly white eyes, set like a triangle above a lipless mouth, stretching as far around its skull as I could see, with flat yellow teeth. The lack of lips gave it the impression of smiling at me, though whether or not it was really looking at me, I could not quite tell. A thin 2-fingered hand stretched itself in my direction throughout the light. The thing made a noise like a high-pitched laugh through its closed teeth. I dropped my food and bolted around my tree, running in the opposite direction. The laughter grew louder and more pronounced as I heard a whooshing sound from behind me. Looking back, I could see it sprinting after me, running at a ludicrous speed, on what I could just make out to be 2 gangly legs supporting a gangly body. I ran as fast as I could, dodging between trees, trying to lose it, but it always sounded so close behind me, like it could just reach out with its long black hands and snatch me. When I looked to my sides, I saw it running beside me, never looking forward but staring at me. It never overtook me but matched my pace exactly. It seemed with ease. I ran as long as I could, as quickly as I could. Finally, I could run no more. I slid to my knees on the dirty forest floor, holding my head up, screaming at the canopy above me. When I had run out of air and had to stop this screaming, I heard the thing saunter up from behind. With surprising strength, it gripped me with both hands, lifting me off the ground, turning me to face it. I struggled to fight it with my energy, but was gone. Its laughter grew louder and louder, deafening, but then suddenly stopped. I stared into its eyes. Stop listening. But then suddenly stopped. I stared into its eyes. Slowly it opened its horrifying maw to reveal an inside as dark as the rest of it, tongueless, like an endless void. As I began to scream again, it shoved me in. I woke with a jolt at my tree, where I was still clutching my meal with both hands now. It was still dark. With a sigh of relief, I took a bite out of my food. It had all been a dream. Thank goodness. I was safe. I turned to my right to reach for the sack with the rest of my food in it. Less than an inch from my face was that same pitch black face. All three eyes widened and gazing into mine. I yelled and threw myself backwards, landing on my back in the moonlight. Before I could get back up, it was on top of me, mouth already widened this time. It screeched laughter as its huge teeth closed around my head. Sometimes I wake up at that tree. Other times I wake up elsewhere in the forest, or already running from it. Once or twice I've been on the fringes of the forest, gazing out the other side, when it jumps from above me and swallows me, starting everything over again. It's always the same monster chasing me, with those pearly eyes and teeth and skin like the night sky. I thought that I would be fine in the forest. For anything that you fear, that any of us fear, you may find it embodied in the forests. I thought that I was fearless, that I would be safe in the forest. How could a fear of the forest persist within the forest itself? I was wrong. My fear stands just as strong, if not stronger here. It's that monster. I struggle with it over and over. I never escape. The monster always finds me. Fear always finds me. I thank you all so much for joining me in this video. Once again, the music that you see to the right and currently here is in the description with a link. Both these stories, links in the description. Hopefully, you would like to stay around the channel, as I'll be doing more readings more often, not just for Halloween anymore. However, if you choose not to, then I hope that I was able to provide you with some entertainment tonight, or perhaps during the day. Just you needing a scare, or perhaps a jolt of energy, and feeling some slight better about where you are currently in your life. Hopefully I was able to provide some of this. If you'd like me to do more readings, please tell me in the comments. I love doing these readings. I love it to death. I love it very much to death. So thank you, everyone, so much for listening to this video. If you'd like to see more, you know what to do. I won't even say it. Again, links in the description to the stories and music. Thank you all so much for listening. Happy Halloween. And I'll see you next time. Or not.